He had flown thousands of miles, built an empire, and earned every privilege the world could offer. Yet when the tray came, the first-class meal he had every right to receive was abruptly denied. Servers hesitated, eyes flicked nervously, and whispers filled the cabin. A black CEO, respected and powerful, was suddenly reminded that even success doesn't shield you from discrimination. How do you react when the very thing you've earned is snatched away in front of everyone? And what do you do when humiliation meets the weight of authority? It had been another long week of meetings, negotiations, and countless decisions that shaped companies and livelihoods. The black CEO moved through his life with quiet precision, a man whose name alone commanded respect in boardrooms from New York to London. On this particular morning, he boarded a flight like any other, first-class ticket in hand, anticipating a brief moment of comfort amid his relentless schedule. The cabin was bright, the seats immaculate, and the world outside moved like clockwork. Yet beneath the polished surface, something unspoken lingered, a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Little did he know, this ordinary flight would soon become a stage for a confrontation that would test not just his patience, but the very authority he had spent years building. As the flight cruised above the clouds, the first-class meal service began. Plates were prepared, silverware gleamed, and the air seemed momentarily calm. He expected the usual precision, the quiet professionalism he had grown accustomed to in countless flights. But the tray that should have been handed to him was stalled. A server hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder before muttering something that barely reached his ears. The hesitation was small, almost imperceptible, but to him, it was a thunderclap. Every fiber of his being recognized it instantly. This wasn't a mistake. The subtle shift in tone, the way other passengers avoided eye contact, and the quiet whisper of disapproval in the cabin were unmistakable signals. The first-class meal, a symbol of privilege, comfort, and respect, had been denied, deliberately. The indignity was suffocating. He had built empires, brokered multi-million-dollar deals, and commanded rooms filled with powerful people, yet here he was, reduced to a target of subtle, yet unmistakable discrimination. His mind raced. Dozens of questions flashed through him. Was it fear, bias, or plain ignorance driving this behavior? He felt the weight of every stare, every paused conversation in the cabin. Around him, passengers pretended not to notice, pretending civility while the quiet injustice unfolded. His hands clenched slightly, resting on the armrests, a silent measure of his growing fury. He had long learned to command attention, to assert himself in corporate boardrooms. But this was different. This was a social battlefield, and the rules weren't clear. Then the meal finally arrived. But the service was cold, almost mechanical. It lacked the attentiveness first-class passengers expected. The subtle exclusion, the lingering glances, the whispered comments, they were all still there, threaded into the experience like a quiet, stinging reminder. Every bite he took was heavy with the knowledge that privilege did not protect him from the pervasive stain of racism. What should have been a mundane, even luxurious part of the journey had become a test of restraint, dignity, and awareness. The more he endured, the more his mind sharpened. Every slight, every hesitation, every unspoken judgment in the cabin was now a challenge to his authority. He realized that this wasn't just about a meal. It was about respect, recognition, and the refusal to be diminished by subtle, insidious bias. The tension in the cabin thickened, unnoticed by many but palpable to him. He could sense the collective discomfort, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What would he do next? As the flight neared its final descent, the moment of reckoning approached. The subtle humiliation had already planted a seed of defiance, a quiet storm gathering strength. In just minutes, the world inside this small, airborne capsule would witness what happens when a man refuses to let injustice pass unchecked. The plane's wheels touched the tarmac, a jolt that mirrored the tension thrumming through him. Every moment of the flight, the hesitation, the whispers, the cold dismissal of service, culminated now heavy as lead in his chest. Around him, passengers adjusted in their seats, oblivious or unwilling to acknowledge the indignity that had unfolded in front of them. but he could feel it all. Every unspoken judgment pressing down like a weight. He rose, calm but deliberate, his gaze sweeping the cabin with the quiet authority that had commanded boardrooms and negotiations alike. The crew's polite masks faltered under the intensity of his stare. The first-class meal he had been denied was no longer just a plate of food. It was a symbol of every subtle, systemic barrier he had faced, and of the audacity of those who assumed power could define worth. The humiliation transformed into something sharper now, a resolve, a fire burning through the simmering indignation. No one spoke as he approached the lead attendant. His words were measured, but every syllable carried the weight of decades of excellence and achievement denied by prejudice. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, the hum of engines and distant chatter fading into the gravity of the moment. Every eye followed, some in fear, others in anticipation, all witnessing the quiet collision of authority and injustice. Minutes stretched into eternity, the balance between restraint and reckoning hanging by a thread. Then, with a decisive gesture, he made it clear this would not stand. The subtle oppression, the dismissal, the disrespect, all of it would have consequences. The crew, once hesitant, now faced the undeniable truth of his power and his unwillingness to be diminished. As the plane taxied toward the gate, one thing was certain. This was more than a confrontation over a meal. It was a reckoning, a turning point that would reverberate far beyond the confines of first class. And as the doors opened, the question lingered in the air, electric and unrelenting. What happens when someone who refuses to be silenced decides it's time for justice? The plane doors opened and the black CEO stepped onto the tarmac, calm but resolute. Every moment of the flight, the hesitation, the whispers, the denial of his meal had led to this point. With unwavering authority, he addressed the entire crew, making it unmistakably clear that their actions were unacceptable. There was no room for excuses, no subtlety left unnoticed. The injustice they had tried to impose had consequences. By the time the meeting ended, he had taken the ultimate step. The entire crew responsible for the humiliation was fired. The act was decisive, a public reclaiming of his dignity and authority. What had started as a moment of indignity had transformed into a powerful statement. Discrimination, no matter how subtle, would not be tolerated. Every bite of that first-class meal had been heavy with the weight of bias, but every action after landing carried the unmistakable weight of justice. Beyond personal vindication, the incident sent ripples far beyond the plane. It highlighted systemic issues that too often go unchallenged, reminding the world that even spaces of comfort and privilege are not immune to prejudice. His decision to act decisively became more than just a reaction. It became a call to awareness, a signal that power combined with integrity can confront injustice head-on. As he walked into the airport terminal, one thought lingered. How many more times do countless others endure silent indignities, too polite or too cautious to respond? His story was no longer just his own. It echoed the experiences of millions navigating a world that measures worth through bias. And in the end, it left one question burning in the air. What happens when someone refuses to accept anything less than the respect they deserve and make sure the world knows it?